Kenya today is overwhelmingly Christian. This is a major transformation that's taken place in the last 50 years in some ways. I think almost 90% of Kenyans would identify, well, between 80 and 90% of Kenyans would identify themselves as Christians.
It's a little America.
Yes, and it's also a little America in this respect, because even though you would identify yourself as Christian, that may or may not mean that you are deeply involved in practicing this religious faith. So there are some people who, of course, are deeply committed and will demonstrate that in whatever, church attendance, religious activities, and so forth. And there are others who will pretty much identify themselves as that. And not. So there's a question of how deep it goes. Most of the churches, most of the Christian churches are some sort of blend of sort of Western and African elements in terms of how they go about doing things and how things function. And you can find that blend playing out in a couple of number of different ways.
Was it Orthodox driven? Was it Protestant?
Mostly Protestant, but there's a good number of Catholics in the nation as well. The Orthodox presence is not in Kenya, not really very significant, but a lot of Protestants, a number of Muslims also, mostly on the coast and in Nairobi, but they're also a minority. The conflict would be over whether people are believe that these traditional spirits or traditional sort of gods have power in their life. And oftentimes conversion to Christianity, for those who convert and are very serious about this, it's a full rejection of that spiritual world. But it's replaced by another spiritual world. And so this is where there's a continuity. I mean, in some ways, in Africa, the spiritual world is much more alive and much more powerful than it is in the United States. And that includes among Christians. So that there is a sense that that God, through the Holy Spirit, has real power to do things in your life. And so, and that can come out sometimes in, claims for miraculous events taking place, much more than what you would find in the United States. And a sense that there are spiritual causes behind a number of things that happen. And so in some ways that's Orthodox with a small o, that's standard traditional Christianity, but it builds pretty effectively on an African understanding of a world where the material and the spiritual are deeply entwined and you don't separate them like we tend to do in the West. Officially, yeah, and in that regard, it's actually very similar to the United States in how it functioned. I mean, Kenya guarantees religious freedom. It's almost necessary because of the diversity and it has so many different Protestant denominations and Catholicism and Islam and some still practitioners of traditional African religion. That and mostly those differences cut across tribal ethnic lines. So among the Kikuyu, for instance, so here you have this Kikuyu with this strong identity. You will find Catholics, but you'll also find Anglicans, and you'll find Presbyterians, and you'll find the church that my mission was connected to, the Africa Inland Church. You'll find numerous Pentecostal groups, and then these other distinctly African Christian groups that are sometimes called African independent churches. All those can be found among the Kikuyu. So religion, as well as among other different ethnic and tribal groups. So religion sort of messes with the categories in certain ways. Probably in a good way.